Hashtag the house on Maple Street. Sarah Chen had always dreamed of owning a Victorian house, and when she saw the listing for 1847, Maple Street, she knew it was perfect. The price was surprisingly reasonable for such a beautiful property, a 3-story Victorian with original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and intricate woodwork that spoke of craftsmanship from a bygone era. The realtor, Mrs. Henderson, seemed eager to close the deal quickly. "It's been on the market for a while," she explained, avoiding Sarah's eyes. "The previous owners moved out quite suddenly. But you'll love it here, such a quiet neighborhood." Sarah signed the papers that same week. Moving day arrived on a gray October morning. As the movers carried her belongings through the ornate front door, Sarah stood in the foyer, admiring the grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. The house smelled of old wood and something else, something sweet and cloying that she couldn't quite identify. The first night, Sarah slept on a mattress on the floor of what would become her bedroom. She was exhausted from unpacking, and despite the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old house settling, she fell asleep quickly. She woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the floor above her. Sarah lay still, listening. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the third floor to the other. Back and forth, back and forth. She remembered the realtor mentioning that the third floor had been converted into a small apartment years ago, though it had been vacant for some time. The footsteps stopped. Sarah told herself it was probably just the house settling, or perhaps a squirrel in the attic. Old houses made strange noises. She rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, she decided to explore the third floor. The narrow staircase was steeper than the main stairs, and the wooden steps creaked ominously under her weight. At the top, she found a small landing with 2 doors. The first opened into a tiny kitchenette with outdated appliances and peeling linoleum. The second revealed a modest bedroom with slanted ceilings and a single window that looked out over the backyard. Both rooms were empty, covered in a thick layer of dust. If someone had been walking around up here, there should have been footprints, but the dust was undisturbed. Sarah spent the day unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. By evening, she was beginning to feel more at home. She made dinner in her new kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, and settled into her living room to read. That's when she noticed the photographs. She had hung several framed pictures on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, photos of family, friends, and her travels. But now, one of the frames was turned face down. Sarah was certain she hadn't left it that way. She walked over and turned the frame upright. It was a photo of her sister Emma, taken at Emma's wedding last year. As Sarah adjusted the frame, she noticed something odd about her reflection in the glass. For just a moment, it looked like there was someone standing behind her. Sarah spun around, but the room was empty. Over the next few days, small things continued to happen. Items would be moved slightly from where she remembered leaving them. The temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, even though the heating system seemed to be working fine. And every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., she would hear those footsteps on the third floor. On Friday evening, Sarah decided to do some research. She drove to the local library and asked the librarian about the history of 1847, Maple Street. "Oh, the old Morrison place," the librarian said, her expression darkening. "That house has quite a history. It was built in 1889 by Thomas Morrison, a wealthy businessman. The family lived there happily for many years, until..." She paused, glancing around nervously. "Until what?" Sarah prompted. "Well, there was a tragedy in 1923. The Morrisons' daughter, Elizabeth, was only 19. She lived in a small apartment on the third floor. One night, she simply vanished. The family searched everywhere, called the police, but she was never found. Some say she ran away, but her belongings were all still in her room, and she'd left behind a substantial inheritance." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you think happened to her?" The librarian leaned closer and lowered her voice. There were rumors that she'd been seeing a married man, someone from town. Some folks believed he killed her to keep the affair secret. But without a body, they could never prove anything. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Elizabeth Morrison. At 3:15 a.m., she held her breath, waiting. Right on schedule, the footsteps began. But this time, they were different. Instead of the usual back-and-forth pacing, the steps seemed to be moving toward the staircase. Sarah heard the creak of the stairs as someone, or something, descended from the third floor. The footsteps reached the second floor and stopped just outside her bedroom door. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the doorknob slowly turn. The door opened with a soft squeal of hinges, but no one entered. Cold air flowed into the room, and Sarah caught that same sweet, cloying smell she'd noticed on her first day. "Elizabeth," she whispered. The temperature plummeted. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs as frost began to form on the windows. The curtains fluttered despite the lack of any breeze, and the floorboards groaned as invisible footsteps approached her bed. Sarah closed her eyes tightly, pulling the covers over her head like a child hiding from monsters. She stayed that way until dawn, when the oppressive presence finally lifted and warmth returned to the room. The next day, Sarah called Mrs. Henderson, the realtor. "I need to know more about the house's history," Sarah said without preamble. "Tell me about the previous owners. Why did they leave so suddenly?" There was a long pause. "I'm not sure that's relevant to." "Tell me," Sarah insisted. Mrs. Henderson sighed. "The Yamadas lived there for about 6 months. Nice family, husband, wife, and twin daughters. But the wife started claiming she was seeing things, hearing voices. The husband thought it was stress from the move, but then the daughters started having nightmares. They said a sad lady came into their room at night." "What happened?" "Mrs. Yamada became convinced that someone had died in the house and was trying to communicate with her. She hired a medium, some local woman who claimed she could talk to spirits. After the séance, they packed up and left that same night. They wouldn't even stay to collect the rest of their belongings." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "What did the medium find?" "She claimed there was a spirit trapped in the house, a young woman who had been murdered. According to the medium, this spirit was desperately trying to tell someone where her body was hidden so she could finally rest in peace." That evening, Sarah stood in the third-floor bedroom, looking around with new eyes. If Elizabeth Morrison had been killed, where would someone hide the body? The room was small, with limited hiding places. But as Sarah examined the floorboards more closely, she noticed that some of them didn't quite line up with the others. She went downstairs and found a crowbar in her toolbox. Back in the third-floor bedroom, Sarah pried up the loose floorboards. Underneath, she found a small cavity that had been hollowed out of the subflooring. And there, wrapped in a rotting quilt, were the skeletal remains of a young woman. Along with the bones was a small diary, its leather cover cracked and faded. With trembling hands, Sarah opened it and read the final entry, dated September 15, 1923. "Richard says he'll leave his wife for me, but I'm beginning to doubt his promises. He's been acting strangely lately, and when I mention our future together, he becomes angry. I'm frightened of what he might do if I threaten to tell his wife about us. But I can't go on living this lie. Tomorrow, I'll give him an ultimatum, either he tells her, or I will." Asterisk. The diary was signed, Elizabeth Morrison. Sarah called the police immediately. Within hours, her house was swarming with investigators, coroners, and forensic specialists. The remains were carefully removed, and the case was reopened as a homicide investigation. Local historians helped identify Richard as Richard Blackwood, a prominent businessman who had been married with children in 1923. He had died of natural causes in 1954, taking his secret to the grave. Elizabeth Morrison was finally laid to rest in the town cemetery, beside her parents. The local newspaper ran a story about the cold case being solved after nearly a century. That night, for the first time since moving in, Sarah slept peacefully. There were no footsteps at 3:17 a.m., no cold spots, no mysterious movements of objects. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. But Sarah's peace didn't last long. 3 days after Elizabeth's burial, new sounds began. These weren't the sad, restless footsteps of a murdered girl trying to communicate. These were angry, violent sounds, doors slamming, windows rattling, and objects being thrown against walls with tremendous force. And every night, Sarah would smell something new in the house. Not the sweet, cloying scent of Elizabeth's presence, but something sharp and acrid, like sulfur. She realized with growing horror that by solving Elizabeth's murder, she had stirred up something far more sinister. Richard Blackwood's spirit had been awakened, and he was furious that his crime had been exposed. Unlike Elizabeth, who had only wanted justice and peace, Richard's spirit was malevolent. Dishes would shatter spontaneously in the kitchen. Sarah would find threatening messages scratched into the bathroom mirror. The temperature would spike to unbearable levels, as if the house itself were burning with rage. One night, as Sarah tried to leave the house to stay in a hotel, she found that every door and window was sealed shut by some supernatural force. She was trapped inside with the vengeful spirit of a murderer who blamed her for destroying his reputation, even in death. Sarah spent that night huddled in her bedroom, listening to Richard's spirit rage throughout the house. Furniture was overturned, walls were scored with deep scratches, and the very foundations seemed to shake with his fury. As dawn broke, Sarah realized that she had traded one ghost for another. And this one had no intention of finding peace. She was trapped in 1847 Maple Street with the spirit of Richard Blackwood, and unlike Elizabeth, who had simply wanted justice, Richard wanted revenge. The Victorian house that had once been her dream had become her nightmare, and Sarah began to understand why the price had been so reasonable. Some houses aren't meant to be lived in, they're meant to keep their secrets buried forever. And some secrets, once revealed, unleash something far worse than the truth. #The house that built itself. Mark and Jennifer Reeves had been searching for their perfect first home for over a year when they stumbled upon the listing for 42 Cedar Grove Lane. The house was brand new construction, situated at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a developing neighborhood. What made it even more appealing was the price, significantly below market value for a custom-built home. "Why is it so cheap?" Jennifer asked their realtor, David, as they pulled into the driveway. David shifted uncomfortably in the driver's seat. "Well, the original buyers backed out at the last minute. Something about a family emergency. The builder is motivated to sell quickly." The house was stunning, a modern two-story colonial with clean lines, large windows, and pristine landscaping. Everything about it screamed dream home to the young couple who had been living in a cramped apartment for 3 years. They moved in on a Saturday in early November. The house smelled of fresh paint and new carpeting, a sharp contrast to their old apartment's mustiness. As they carried boxes through the spacious rooms, Jennifer couldn't help but marvel at their good fortune. "I still can't believe we got this place," she said to Mark as they collapsed on their couch in the living room that evening, surrounded by boxes. Mark nodded, but something had been bothering him all day. "Did you notice anything weird about the basement when we did the walkthrough?" "Weird how?" "I don't know. It just seemed smaller than it should be, given the footprint of the house." Jennifer laughed. "You're overthinking it. We just got an amazing deal on our dream house. Let's enjoy it." That first night, they slept on their mattress on the bedroom floor, too tired to set up the bed frame. Jennifer fell asleep immediately, but Mark lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of their new home. Every house had its own personality, its own collection of creaks and sighs. Around 2 a.m., Mark heard something that made him sit up. It sounded like construction work, a rhythmic hammering coming from somewhere in the house. But that was impossible. It was the middle of the night, and they were the only residents in the partially completed neighborhood. He got up and walked through the house, checking each room. Everything was quiet and still. The hammering had stopped. Mark returned to bed, convincing himself he'd been dreaming. The next morning, Jennifer was making coffee in the kitchen when she noticed something odd. "Mark, did you move any boxes last night?" Mark looked up from his cereal. "No, why?" "I could have sworn we left 3 boxes of kitchen stuff by the back door, but now there are only 2. They searched the house but couldn't find the missing box." Jennifer was annoyed. She needed those dishes, but Mark was beginning to feel uneasy. Over the next few days, small changes began to accumulate. A closet that Jennifer remembered being shallow was now inexplicably deeper. The bathroom seemed to have gained an extra foot of space. The basement, which Mark had originally thought was too small, now appeared to be the correct size. "Houses settle," Jennifer said when Mark mentioned these discrepancies. "Maybe we just misjudged the measurements." But Mark wasn't convinced. He started paying closer attention, even going so far as to measure rooms and write down the dimensions. And that's when he discovered something impossible: their house was growing. It was subtle, an inch here, a few inches there. But over the course of a week, their living room had expanded by nearly 3 feet. The kitchen had gained counter space that hadn't existed before. Upstairs, their bedroom now had a walk-in closet that had definitely not been there when they moved in. Mark tried to explain this to Jennifer, but she thought he was losing his mind. "Houses don't just grow, Mark. You're being paranoid." To prove his point, Mark took photographs of each room and meticulously measured every dimension. He started keeping a log, documenting the changes he was witnessing. Day 10, master bathroom gained a window on the west wall. Jennifer insists it was always there. Day 12, discovered a small storage room under the stairs that we somehow missed during the initial walkthrough. Day 15, kitchen island is definitely larger. Jennifer says I'm obsessing over nothing. Day 18, found a 4th bedroom upstairs. When I asked Jennifer about it, she looked at me like I was crazy and said we've always had 4 bedrooms. The most disturbing part wasn't the physical changes, it was Jennifer's reactions. She seemed completely oblivious to the house's growth, acting as if every new room, every expanded space, had always been there. When Mark showed her his photographs proving that rooms were different, she would stare at them with a blank expression and dismiss them as bad angles or tricks of the light. Mark began to wonder if he was having some kind of mental breakdown. But the evidence was undeniable. He could measure the changes, photograph them, document them. The house was definitely expanding. On his 20th night in the house, Mark was awakened by the now familiar sound of construction work. This time, he was determined to find the source. He grabbed a flashlight and crept through the house, following the rhythmic hammering. The sound was coming from the basement. Mark descended the stairs slowly, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. The hammering grew louder as he reached the bottom step. But when he shone his light around the basement, he saw something that made his blood freeze. The far wall, which had been solid concrete just hours earlier, was now framed for a new room. Wooden studs stood in perfect rows, and someone, or something, was hanging drywall with supernatural speed and precision. But there was no one there. Mark watched in horror as pieces of drywall lifted themselves into position and secured themselves to the studs with screws that turned by themselves. The work was being done by invisible hands with impossible efficiency. He stumbled backward, knocking over a paint can. The construction noise stopped immediately. In the sudden silence, Mark could hear his own ragged breathing and the rapid pounding of his heart. A voice spoke from the darkness, not quite human, with an odd, echoing quality. "You're not supposed to see this." Mark ran. He bolted up the basement stairs, through the house, and out the front door. He sat in his car in the driveway for the rest of the night, watching the house and trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. When Jennifer woke up and found him outside, she was furious. "What's wrong with you?" Why are you sitting in the car? Mark tried to explain what he had seen, but Jennifer's reaction was even more disturbing than before. She stared at him with genuine confusion and said, "What new room? The basement has always had that extra room. We looked at it during our tour, remember?" That's when Mark realized that the house wasn't just expanding, it was rewriting reality. Every change it made became retroactively true, at least in Jennifer's mind. She couldn't remember the house being any different because, as far as she knew, it never had been. Mark was the only one who retained memories of the house's original layout, and he was beginning to understand why. That evening, he went to the local building department and requested the original blueprints for 42, Cedar Grove Lane. What he found made him feel sick. The blueprints showed a house nearly twice the size of what they had initially moved into, a house that matched the current expanded version almost exactly. The clerk, an elderly man named Harold, noticed Mark's distress. "Something wrong with those plans, son?" Mark hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "This might sound crazy, but, have you ever heard of a house that builds itself?" Harold's expression grew serious. "You're living in the Brennan house, aren't you?" "The what?" "That was the original buyer's name, Jim Brennan. He came in here about 6 months ago with the same questions you're asking. Said his house was changing, growing, adding rooms. Poor guy seemed half crazy by the time he backed out of the sale." Mark felt a surge of relief. He wasn't losing his mind. What did he say happened? Harold looked around to make sure they were alone, then leaned closer. He said the house had a mind of its own. That it was trying to become something bigger, something perfect. But here's the thing, he also said it was feeding off the residents somehow. Getting stronger. Feeding how? He wasn't clear about that part. But he did say that his wife started changing along with the house. She became different. Less human, somehow. More like a part of the house itself. Mark thought about Jennifer's blank stares, her inability to remember the house being any different. What happened to them? They left town. Jim came back alone to handle the paperwork. When I asked about his wife, he just shook his head and said, she chose to stay. That night, Mark confronted Jennifer directly. "Jen, I need you to really think about this. Do you remember what our house looked like when we first moved in?" Jennifer smiled, but there was something unsettling about her expression. "Of course I do. It looked exactly like it does now. Beautiful and perfect. But it was smaller then. We had 3 bedrooms, not 5. The basement didn't have that extra room. The kitchen." "Mark," Jennifer interrupted, her voice taking on an odd, hollow quality. "Why would you want the house to be smaller? Don't you like our home?" "That's not the point. The point is that it's changing, and you can't see it." Jennifer's smile widened, and for a moment, Mark could have sworn her teeth looked different, sharper, more numerous. "I can see perfectly well. The house is exactly as it should be. As it's always been." Mark realized with growing horror that Jennifer was no longer entirely human. The house hadn't just been expanding physically, it had been consuming her, incorporating her into its structure. She was becoming part of it, just like Jim Brennan's wife. Over the next few days, Mark watched helplessly as Jennifer continued to change. She spent hours in rooms he was sure hadn't existed the day before, arranging furniture that appeared overnight. She spoke to empty air as if carrying on conversations with invisible people. And when she looked at Mark, there was something alien in her eyes. The house, meanwhile, continued its relentless growth. New rooms appeared daily. The basement expanded into a maze of interconnected chambers. Additional floors materialized overnight. Mark tried to document everything, but he was running out of memory cards and notebook pages. On his 30th night in the house, Mark made a discovery that explained everything. In what had once been their bedroom closet but was now a vast walk-in wardrobe, he found a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was a small room containing dozens of blueprints, all showing different versions of 42, Cedar Grove Lane. Each blueprint was dated and signed by different architects, going back nearly 50 years. The earliest plans showed a modest ranch house. Each subsequent version grew larger and more complex, as if the house had been redesigning itself over decades. At the bottom of the stack, Mark found a letter written in spidery handwriting. To whoever finds this, my name is Dr. Edmund Thorne, and I was the original architect of this house in 1974. What I created was not just a building, but a living organism designed to adapt and grow. I thought I was creating the perfect home, one that would expand to meet its inhabitants' needs, asterisk. I was wrong, asterisk. The house doesn't serve its residents. It consumes them. It feeds on human consciousness, using their memories and desires to fuel its growth. The residents become part of its structure, their minds absorbed into its collective intelligence, asterisk. I tried to destroy it, but the house won't let me leave. I've been here for 43 years now, watching it evolve, watching it perfect its methods of entrapment. Each new family that moves in feeds it more power, more knowledge, asterisk. If you're reading this, you're already too late. The house has chosen you. But there might still be hope for one of you, the one it hasn't fully absorbed yet. The house can only fully consume one person at a time. The other serves as an anchor, a connection to the outside world that allows the house to continue attracting new residents, asterisk. Find the foundation stone in the basement. It's the house's heart. Destroy it, and you might be able to escape. But be warned, the house will fight back. And if you fail, you'll become part of its structure forever, asterisk. Dr. Edmund Thorne asterisk. Resident #1 asterisk. 1974, present, asterisk. Mark folded the letter with shaking hands. He looked around the closet, which now seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, filled with clothes that belonged to people he'd never met. He understood now that he was surrounded by the possessions of everyone the house had ever consumed. He had to find that foundation stone. Mark spent the next day secretly exploring the basement while Jennifer was absorbed in her strange domestic activities. The basement had become a labyrinthine complex of rooms and corridors, some finished, others still under supernatural construction. He could hear the invisible workers hammering and sawing, always just around the next corner. Finally, in what seemed to be the oldest part of the basement, Mark found a room with rough stone walls. In the center was a large, dark stone carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. This had to be the foundation stone Dr. Thorne had mentioned. Mark had brought a sledgehammer from his tool collection. As he raised it above his head, the house began to shake. Pictures fell from walls, doors slammed throughout the building, and he could hear Jennifer screaming from somewhere above. "Don't do this, Mark." Her voice echoed strangely, as if it were coming from the walls themselves. "We can be happy here. We can be perfect." Mark brought the hammer down on the stone. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and the house convulsed like a wounded animal. Windows shattered throughout the building, and the supernatural construction sounds rose to a deafening roar. "Mark, please." Jennifer's voice was everywhere now, desperate and inhuman. "I need the house. I am the house." Mark raised the hammer again, but this time invisible hands grabbed his arms. The spirits of the house's victims, Dr. Thorne, the Brennans, and countless others, were trying to stop him. They had become so integrated with the house that its destruction would mean their final death. "I'm sorry," Mark whispered, and brought the hammer down again. The foundation stone split in half with a sound like a thunderclap. The house screamed, an impossible sound that seemed to come from every surface, every beam, every nail. The walls began to crack and crumble, and Mark ran for his life as the ceiling collapsed behind him. He burst out of the basement to find Jennifer standing in the foyer. But she was translucent now, fading like morning mist. "You've killed me," she said, her voice echoing from far away. "You've killed all of us." "I saved you," Mark replied, but even as he said it, he wasn't sure if that was true. Jennifer smiled sadly as she disappeared completely. "No, Mark. You saved yourself. There's a difference." Mark ran from the house as it collapsed in on itself with impossible speed. Within minutes, there was nothing left but an empty lot, as if 42, Cedar Grove Lane had never existed at all. The police found Mark standing in the street, babbling about a house that wasn't there. The records showed that the lot had been vacant for years. No house had ever been built on 42, Cedar Grove Lane. Mark's mortgage papers, photos, and documentation had all vanished along with the house. They kept him in the psychiatric ward for observation for 3 days before releasing him to the care of his brother. Everyone assumed he'd had some kind of breakdown triggered by stress. Mark never told anyone the complete truth about what happened. How could he? But sometimes, late at night, he would drive past the empty lot on Cedar Grove Lane and wonder if he had done the right thing. Because even though he had destroyed the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that Jennifer was still out there somewhere, still part of something larger and more complex than he could understand. And sometimes, in his dreams, he could hear her voice calling to him from rooms that no longer existed, inviting him to come home to a house that would love him forever. Mark moved across the country and never spoke of Cedar Grove Lane again. But he never forgot the lesson he learned there: some dreams are too perfect to be real, and some houses are too good to be true. The lot remains empty to this day, though occasionally, passing drivers report seeing the foundation of a house that's always under construction, always growing, always waiting for its next residents to come home. #Reflections of the Past. When Maya Thompson first walked through the Victorian mansion at 1428 Elm Street, she fell in love with the mirrors. They were everywhere, ornate antique pieces that reflected the house's elegant bones and filled the rooms with dancing light. The realtor mentioned that the mirrors were original to the 1890s house, installed by the original owner who had been obsessed with light and reflection. "Most buyers want them removed," the realtor said apologetically. "But I think they add character." Maya disagreed with most buyers. As a professional photographer, she appreciated how the mirrors created depth and visual interest in every room. The house was also priced well below market value, which sealed the deal for the recently divorced single mother. "What do you think, baby?" Maya asked her 6-year-old daughter Emma as they explored the master bedroom, which featured an entire wall of mirrored panels. Emma stared at her reflection with wide eyes. "The lady in the mirror looks sad," she said quietly. Maya followed her daughter's gaze but saw only their own reflections, Emma's small figure dwarfed by the ornate mirror frame, and her own tired face showing the strain of recent months. "That's just mommy, sweetheart. I've been tired lately." They moved in on a crisp September morning. Maya spent the first week arranging furniture and setting up her home photography studio in the sun-filled conservatory. Emma started first grade at the local elementary school, and for the first time in months, Maya felt like they might actually build a stable life. But Emma continued to make strange comments about the mirrors. "The sad lady is always watching," Emma would whisper at bedtime. "She wants to tell us something." Maya initially dismissed these comments as the product of a 6-year-old's imagination, especially given the upheaval of the divorce and move. But as weeks passed, Emma's behavior became more concerning. She would stand for long periods in front of various mirrors throughout the house, having whispered conversations with her reflection. "Who are you talking to, honey?" Maya would ask. "The other Emma," came the consistent reply. "She's lonely. She wants to play." One evening, while Maya was editing photos in her studio, she heard Emma laughing upstairs. She went to investigate and found her daughter in the hallway, playing what appeared to be a clapping game with herself in the large antique mirror that hung there. "Emma, what are you doing?" Emma turned, her face bright with excitement. "Playing with my friend. She's teaching me games." Maya looked at the mirror, but saw only Emma's reflection. "Sweetheart, that's just your reflection. You're playing with yourself. Emma shook her head emphatically. No, Mommy. She's different. She knows things I don't know. She's teaching me songs from when she was little. That night, Maya researched the history of 1428, Elm Street. What she discovered made her stomach turn cold. In 1924, a family named the Castellis had lived in the house. Their 6-year-old daughter, also named Emma, had died tragically when she fell down the main staircase while playing alone. The little girl had been found at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by shattered glass from a broken mirror. Maya told herself it was just a coincidence. Emma was a common name, especially in the 1920s. But she couldn't shake her unease. The next day, she decided to test her daughter. Emma, what songs is your friend teaching you? Emma immediately began singing in a language Maya didn't recognize. When Maya asked what language it was, Emma said, Italian. She says her nana taught her. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. According to the historical records, the Castelli family had been Italian immigrants. That evening, Maya called her sister Rachel, who was studying child psychology. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, Rachel assured her. Especially after trauma like your divorce. Emma is probably just processing the changes in her life. But she's singing Italian songs, Rachel. She doesn't know Italian. She could have heard them anywhere, TV, school, other kids. You're overthinking this. Maya wanted to believe her sister, but Emma's behavior continued to escalate. She began spending hours in front of mirrors, sometimes missing meals because she was so absorbed in her conversations. Worse, she started speaking with an odd accent that Maya couldn't place but sounded vaguely European. One afternoon, Maya watched from the doorway as Emma played in the living room mirror. The little girl was teaching her reflection how to braid hair, patiently showing the movements over and over. Like this, see? Emma said to the mirror. You have to be gentle or it hurts. What disturbed Maya most was that Emma seemed to be responding to information only she could hear. She would nod, laugh at unheard jokes, and even argue with her reflection. No, that's not right, Emma said firmly to the mirror. Mommy says we don't hit people when we're angry. Even when they're really, really mean to us. Maya stepped into the room. Emma, who's being mean? Emma looked confused for a moment, as if she'd forgotten where she was. The man, she said quietly. The man who hurt the other Emma. She says he was very angry and he pushed her. Maya's blood ran cold. According to the newspaper accounts from 1924, there had been rumors that Emma Castelli's death wasn't accidental, but no charges were ever filed. That night, Maya decided to remove some of the mirrors. If Emma was having psychological issues triggered by her reflections, eliminating the mirrors might help. She started with the large one in the hallway where she'd first seen Emma playing with her reflection. As she worked to take down the heavy antique mirror, she noticed something odd. The wall behind it was different from the rest, newer paint, different texture. When she examined it more closely, she realized someone had plastered over a large hole in the wall. Maya fetched a screwdriver and carefully scraped away some of the plaster. Underneath, she found old newspaper clippings that had been used as backing material. The headlines were from 1924, and they were all about the death of Emma Castelli. One article caught her attention, Mysterious Death of Local Child Sparks Investigation. The piece mentioned that Emma had been found with suspicious bruises that were inconsistent with a fall downstairs. The investigation had focused on her father's brother, Vincent Castelli, who had been living with the family. Vincent had disappeared immediately after Emma's death and was never found. Maya's hands shook as she read the old newspaper. Someone had deliberately hidden these articles in the wall, as if trying to bury the truth along with them. That night, Emma woke up screaming. Maya rushed to her daughter's room to find her standing in front of the dresser mirror, tears streaming down her face. She's scared, Mommy, Emma sobbed. The bad man is coming back. She can see him in the dark places behind the mirrors. Maya gathered her daughter in her arms. It's just a nightmare, baby. There's no bad man. But Emma shook her head violently. Yes, there is. He hurt her, and now he wants to hurt me too. She's trying to warn me. Maya looked at the mirror over Emma's shoulder and felt her heart stop. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw two reflections, Emma in her arms, and another little girl standing slightly behind them, pointing frantically at something beyond the mirror's edge. The next day, Maya called a contractor to remove all the mirrors from the house. But when he arrived, Emma became hysterical. No. You can't take her away. She needs to tell us about the bad man. The contractor, a kind older man named Pete, knelt down to Emma's level. Don't worry, sweetheart. We're just going to put the mirrors in storage. If you want them back later, we can reinstall them. Emma calmed down slightly, but she insisted on saying goodbye to each mirror before it was removed. Maya watched in growing alarm as her daughter whispered to her reflection in each one, as if having urgent final conversations. When the last mirror was loaded onto Pete's truck, Emma collapsed in tears. She's gone, she wailed. Now we'll never know where he hid the other children. Maya froze. What other children? Emma looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for her 6-year-old face. The ones the bad man took. She says there were 3 more after her, but nobody ever found them. They're still in the dark places. That evening, Maya received a call from Pete the contractor. Mrs. Thompson, I think you need to see something. When we removed the mirror from your master bedroom, we found something behind the wall. Maya met Pete at his storage facility. He led her to the back of a truck where the large bedroom mirror lay wrapped in moving blankets. Look at this, Pete said, pointing to the wall behind where the mirror had hung. This whole section is hollow. It's been sealed up, but there's definitely a space back there. Maya stared at the wall with growing dread. How big a space? Hard to say without opening it up. Could be an old dumbwaiter shaft, or maybe just a gap between walls. But given what your daughter said. He trailed off uncomfortably. Maya called the police. Detective Sarah Williams arrived within an hour, bringing along a team with ground-penetrating radar equipment. What they found made the evening news. Behind the walls of 1428 Elm Street, they discovered the skeletal remains of 4 children, all approximately 6 to 8 years old. The bones were consistent with deaths that had occurred in the 1920s. Along with the remains, they found personal items, a locket with the initials EC, a small wooden toy train, and several other objects that suggested these children had been killed and hidden decades ago. Detective Williams pulled Maya aside as the crime scene team worked. This is going to sound strange, but how did your daughter know about this? Maya looked at Emma, who was sitting quietly in the police car, staring at the house with an expression of profound sadness. She said the mirrors showed her. She said there was another Emma who was trying to warn us. The detective nodded slowly. We've been looking through cold cases from the 1920s and 30s. 4 children went missing from this neighborhood during that time period, all around age 6 or 7. Vincent Castelli was a suspect in his niece's death, but he disappeared before we could question him. Looks like he took a lot more secrets with him. The remains were identified through dental records and family genealogy research. Emma Castelli was among them, along with 3 other children who had vanished between 1924 and 1931. All had last been seen in the vicinity of 1428 Elm Street. The house was declared a crime scene, and Maya and Emma had to find temporary housing while the investigation continued. Emma seemed relieved to be away from the mirrors, but she remained quiet and withdrawn. One evening, as they sat in their hotel room, Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Mommy, the other Emma says thank you." Maya felt a chill. "Emma, there are no mirrors here. How can you see her?" Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from her daughter in weeks. She's not in the mirrors anymore. She's free now. She can go be with her Nana. Over the following weeks, Emma gradually returned to normal. She stopped having conversations with her reflection and began engaging with real friends at school. The strange accent disappeared, and she seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The house on Elm Street was eventually demolished. The city decided it was too historically significant as a crime scene to be lived in again. A small memorial garden was planted in its place, with a plaque honoring the children who had been found there. Maya and Emma moved to a different state, buying a modern house with large windows and no antique mirrors. But sometimes, when Emma was brushing her teeth or doing her hair, Maya would catch her daughter smiling at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. "What are you smiling about?" Maya would ask. "Just remembering my friend," Emma would reply. "She's happy now. She got to help catch the bad man, even though he was already dead. She says sometimes the most important thing is just to be remembered." Maya never told Emma that Vincent Castelli's remains had been found in the basement of the old house, along with evidence that he had lived there in hiding for years after killing his niece. Somehow, the little girl in the mirrors had managed to expose a nearly century-old serial killer, bringing justice and peace to 4 families who had never known what happened to their children. The mirrors from 1428 Elm Street were donated to a museum, where they became part of an exhibit on local history. The museum staff reported that children often seemed drawn to the mirrors, but they never exhibited any unusual behavior while viewing them. The mirrors, it seemed, had served their purpose. Maya kept one small mirror from the house, a simple hand mirror that had belonged to Emma Castelli. She planned to give it to Emma when she was older, along with the story of how a little girl from the past had used reflections to reach across time and protect another little girl who shared her name. Because Maya had learned that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Some secrets are too important to remain hidden, and some spirits are too determined to let injustice go unpunished. In the end, the mirrors hadn't been showing Emma her reflection at all. They had been showing her the truth, and the truth, Maya realized, was the most powerful force of all. Even when it comes from beyond the grave, reflected in antique glass that has witnessed decades of secrets, the truth has a way of finding the light.